Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs. The first pig loved to play and have fun. She would spend hours out in the fields making daisy chains and climbing trees. The second pig was very good looking. He liked to go down to the pond and look at his reflection all day. The third pig was extremely clever. He liked to stay in his bedroom reading books and doing sums. But sometimes the little pigs would forget to help Mummy and Daddy Pig with the chores, and this made them feel very cross. One day, Mummy Pig said, "I've had enough of you 3 lazy little pigs. This house is a terrible mess, and you 3 don't help at all. In fact, you make it 10 times worse. It's time you grew up and moved out. Then maybe I'll have a chance to make daisy chains down by the pond, and maybe even finish my book." The 3 little pigs were a bit sad that they were being turfed out. But the third very clever little pig said, "If we all have our own houses, no one can make us do any chores." The other little pigs liked this idea, so they packed their bags with everything they would need out in the big wide world. Mummy Pig waved them off with her handkerchief. "Watch out for the big bad wolf," she cried after them. "What did she say?" said the first pig. "Wasn't listening," said the second pig. "Me neither," said the third pig. The 3 little pigs shrugged their shoulders and off they went. After a while, the 3 little pigs walked past a huge meadow full of wild flowers, and the first pig stopped to have a look. She was getting a bit bored of walking and wished she could go and play. Just then, a big red tractor with a trailer full of straw came bumping along down the road behind them. As the tractor came closer, it went over a huge bump and a bale of hay fell off the back. "That'll do," the first pig said, and hugged the other little pigs goodbye. She quickly made a sweet little house out of the straw. It was a bit of a rush job, and it wasn't very sturdy or strong, but it was cosy enough, and the first pig spent the rest of the day picking flowers and playing in the meadow. The second pig and third pig carried on down the road, and after a while they walked past a big, wide, lazy river and stopped for a drink. The second pig wished he could stay longer, and, as luck would have it, another big red tractor came bumping down the road, this time with a trailer full of sticks. As the tractor came closer, it went over a huge bump and a bundle of sticks fell off the back. "That'll do," the second pig said, and hugged the third pig goodbye. The second pig spent a little longer making his house, but only because he wanted it to be beautiful, not to make it sturdy or strong. When his house was finished, it looked absolutely lovely, with not a stick out of place. He spent the rest of the afternoon next to the river, admiring his gorgeous reflection. The third pig carried on down the road until he came to a lovely spot near to town, just a short walk from the library. He looked up and down the road, wishing for a tractor that something might fall off the back of. Soon enough, a tractor did come along, and wouldn't you know it, it went over a big bump and a lovely big pallet of bricks fell off the back. "That'll do," said the third pig, and got to work making his house. Now, the third pig was a bit of a smarty pants and decided to make the strongest, sturdiest house he could. He took all night building the house, and it had a smart front door and a nice big fireplace and a handsome chimney on the top. When he was finished, he closed the door and locked it behind him and sat down to do some sums. The 3 little pigs loved their houses, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, that's not quite true, because the big bad wolf had picked up the 3 little pigs' delicious scent and found himself outside the first pig's straw house in no time at all. The big bad wolf was an expert at eating piggies, and he knew just what to do. Little pig, let me come in." "Not by the hairs on my chinny chin chin, I will not let you in," replied the first pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," howled the big bad wolf. He took an enormous deep breath and, before he could blow it down, a gentle breeze came along and scattered the straw house in the wind, leaving the poor little pig trembling where it once stood. The big bad wolf put the first pig in his sack for later. The big bad wolf carried on down the road, following the yummy scent of the second pig. Soon enough, he came across the stick house. Little pig, let me come in." "Not by the hairs of my chinny chin chin, I will not let you in," replied the second pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," howled the big bad wolf. He took an enormous deep breath and blew as hard as he could. The stick house wibbled and wobbled and swayed, and before long came crashing to the ground, leaving the poor little pig trembling where it once stood. The big bad wolf put the second pig in his sack for later. The big bad wolf carried on down the road, following the scrumptious scent of the third pig. Soon enough, he came across the brick house. Little pig, let me come in." "Not by the hairs on my chinny chin chin, I will not let you in," replied the third pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," howled the big bad wolf. He took an enormous deep breath and blew as hard as he could, but nothing happened. He took an even bigger, deeper breath and blew the hardest he had ever blown. The house didn't even quiver. The big bad wolf wasn't very happy about this. He was supposed to be an expert at eating piggies. It would be really embarrassing if this little piggy got away. He tied the sack full of the first and second pigs to a tree and looked all around the house for a way in. Spying the chimney, he climbed the drain pipe and crossed the roof. It was a bit of a tight squeeze and it was quite warm, but it would be worth it, he told himself. The big bad wolf sat on the edge of the chimney and jumped. The wolf fell down, down, down the chimney, right into the fireplace below. He jumped up, howling, and found that the very end of his long tail was on fire. The wolf ran out of the door and back down the road, and he never tried to eat another pig as long as he lived. The three little pigs all laughed and danced and hugged all night. From then on, they all lived in the strong, sturdy brick house and worked together to keep it clean and tidy. The very clever third pig used his great big brain to help them use their time wisely. The very beautiful second pig showed them how to make the house look beautiful. And the very playful first pig showed them how to have fun while they worked. And they really did all live happily ever after. The Three Little Pigs at Christmas. Once upon a time, not very far away from your town, in a cosy brick house, there lived three little pigs. They felt safe and happy in their sturdy home, especially as they knew they had seen off the big bad wolf, and he would bother them no longer. And with Christmas just around the corner, they were bustling with excitement as they readied themselves and their home to celebrate their favourite time of the year together. Each little pig had their own special job to prepare for the festivities. The first pig, who loved to play and have fun, made the games and activities they would play on the big day: Pin the Tail on the Wolf, Dizzy Piggy, and Woodland Whispers. The second pig, who liked to make things beautiful, decorated the house with holly and ivy, twinkling lights, paper snowflakes, and a huge Christmas tree overflowing with tinkling bells, shiny baubles, and sparkling tinsel. The third pig, who was very clever, was in charge of the food. Making a festive feast is pretty tricky, and it takes a lot of concentrating and skill, so he was the perfect pig for the job. He made buttery roasted parsnips and creamy cauliflower cheese, sweet nutty stuffing and crisp roast potatoes. And for pudding, he made a sumptuous cherry pie and custard. Everything looked delicious. But as they were busy with their preparations, the pigs couldn't help but feel that something was missing. Just as they were pondering this, there was a loud knock on the door. The pigs jumped and looked at each other, unsure who would be visiting them on Christmas Day. The first pig peered through the window and gasped. "It's a fox!" he squeaked, trembling a little. The other pigs exchanged worried glances. The fox stood on the doorstep, shivering and cold, looking hungry and lonely, and the pigs straight away felt sorry for him. After all, it was Christmas, a time of year to be open and generous, and they were sure the fox felt the same, so they opened the door. Come in, the pigs cried. Inside, the fox was ushered over to the fire and given a cup of hot cocoa and a blanket. They bustled around him, trying to help him feel warm and comfortable and involving him in their Christmas traditions. As the fox warmed up, he became quite chatty, and the pigs were pleased to see that he wanted to get involved in the preparations. He tried to help the first pig with getting the games ready, but he found it quite tricky to understand all the rules, and he kept saying things like, "These games don't look very fun. Can't we play Chase the Chase the Mouse?" It was a bit annoying, as the first pig had spent so much time preparing, so he suggested that the fox help with the decorating. The fox tried helping the second pig to hang a string of lights over the fireplace, but he kept getting tangled up. He said, "All these decorations are a bit over the top, aren't they? We usually just go out hunting, go for a lovely walk and then come home for supper." This sort of comment wasn't really that helpful, so the second pig suggested that the fox help in the kitchen. The fox tried to help the third pig with buttering the parsnips, but he kept doing it a bit too roughly, and the parsnips were turning to mush. "Is this all we're having?" the fox said, wrinkling up his nose. "Well, what do you usually have?" the third pig inquired, a little irritated. The fox thought for a moment. "Sometimes we have rabbit," he said, putting the butter knife down on the table. "Sometimes we have pheasant," he said, wiping his fingers clean. "But our favourite thing to have for Christmas dinner," he said as he licked his lips, "is pig." He leapt over the table towards the pigs, and they squealed and ran through the front door and out into the snowy night. The woods were empty. All the other creatures were at home celebrating with their families, so there was no one there to help as the pigs ran through the night, the fox snapping at their heels. Suddenly, there wasn't just one fox, not two, but a whole family of foxes chasing the pigs. This had been their plan from the start. The pigs ran and ran, jumping over fallen logs and scraping through brambles, and they were starting to get tired, starting to slow down. Suddenly, they heard a howl, and then, there in front of them was the big, bad wolf, snarling and snapping his jaws. The pigs were terrified, but not as terrified as the foxes. They were enemies of the wolf and had been for generations. The foxes turned tail and scampered back into the woods, whimpering. The pigs were frozen in place, trembling at the new danger before them. But the wolf stopped snarling, sat down, and smiled nervously at them. "Hello, pigs," he said gently. The pigs said nothing. They had been fooled already tonight, and they wouldn't allow it to happen again. "I understand that it might be hard to trust me after everything that happened," the wolf said. "You know, all that huffing and puffing business." He looked a little embarrassed. "Well, I mean to make amends. I was actually on my way to your very nice house now to give you these." He held open his sack, and inside were delicately wrapped Christmas presents, addressed to the pigs. "For us?" the pigs said. "For you," the wolf confirmed. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I regret how I treated you all. It's no wonder I've never really had any friends when that's how I used to behave. And, well, Christmas is just such a terrible time to be lonely." He offered them a small, hopeful smile. The pigs looked at each other.
What?
They finally realised what was missing from their Christmas. They had been having such a wonderful time together, but deep down, they knew that the wolf was out in the woods, cold and alone, and they simply couldn't enjoy Christmas because of it. "Come on," the pigs said. "You better come home with us." "Really?" the wolf said, his ears pricking up in surprise. "After everything?" "Yep," the pig said. "After all, Christmas is a time for eating, drinking, games, presents and fun. But it's also a time for kindness, for generosity and for forgiveness. So that's what we'll do. Let's go." The wolf followed them home through the woods, chatting and laughing all the way. As they entered the cosy little brick house, he was instantly warmed by the fire. But he also felt warm in his heart too, because he knew he had 3 new friends and his old life was far behind him. He gave the pigs their presents: a banjo for the pig who loved to play and have fun, brightly coloured paints for the pig who loved beautiful things, and a library card for the clever pig, so he could read all the books he wanted and would never have to stop learning. The pigs were delighted. The wolf enjoyed the delicious supper and all the games, and the pigs decided that as their special guest, and because he was the tallest, he could put the star at the top of the tree. At the end of the evening, they all hugged the wolf, and he thanked them for their kindness. They invited him back the next year and all the years after that, and he gratefully accepted, knowing that they would now be lifelong friends. The Big Bad Wolf and Santa Claus. There are many stories about the Big Bad Wolf. Many tales of his sly schemes, of his dastardly deeds, and his preposterous plots. They are told all around the world, in every culture, in every language, for centuries past. But I wonder if you've ever heard this one before. This story takes place at Christmas time, when the forest animals were busy decorating their homes and preparing for the festivities. Bright lights twinkled in the trees, and the forest hummed with joy. But the wolf's den, hidden away in the darkest part of the forest, was cold, empty, and quiet. No lights twinkled over his door. The wolf huddled alone in his den, staring out at the snowy woods. "I hate Christmas," he muttered. Everywhere the wolf went, he saw animals enjoying themselves. The squirrels had strung up shiny ribbons in the trees, and the rabbits were building snowmen in the meadow. The wolf huffed to himself. How ridiculous. On Christmas Eve, the wolf was prowling near the edge of the forest when something strange caught his eye. A flash of red and white hurtled through the sky. The wolf squinted. Surely not, he thought to himself with a sneer. His eyes tracked the red and white blur as it came careening down to the ground with a crash that echoed throughout the forest. A prickle of panic rose up in the wolf, but he squashed it back down and shrugged it off. He didn't care, he told himself. But he found that he couldn't quite bring himself to go home without having a quick check, so he started through the trees to investigate. The wolf's heart skipped a beat. He had heard stories about Santa Claus, but had never believed they could really be true. But there, just as surely as he stood there himself, was the sleigh, the reindeer, and the very real Santa Claus right there before him. He looked unharmed, and the sleigh seemed to be in good working order, so the wolf turned and started to head back to his den. "Ho, ho, ho!" Santa boomed heartily, to no one in particular. "I seem to have had a little mishap. Not to worry, still plenty of time to deliver all the presents to the good little boys and girls." What nonsense, thought the wolf, ignoring him. But as he walked away, he felt a tiny twinge of regret. It might have been nice to meet the real Santa, but the wolf knew for certain he was on the naughty list and felt sure that Santa wouldn't want to meet him. He trudged a few steps more, and just as he was almost out of earshot, he heard Santa once more. "Oh no," Santa said, his voice laced with dread. The wolf stopped. He turned and saw Santa Claus looking in his magical sack, rummaging around in it, turning it upside down and shaking it. It was empty. The wolf was torn. Santa clearly needed help, but would he accept it from someone on the naughty list? Gathering his courage, the wolf stepped out from behind the tree and cleared his throat. Santa turned around, seemingly surprised to see the big bad wolf standing there. But then Santa's rosy face broke into a huge, warm smile. "Well, well," Santa said, "what can I do for you?" The wolf tried hard to look like his heart wasn't doing backflips, and he said calmly, "Well, you looked like you needed some help, and it doesn't look like there's anyone else around, so, I'm here." Santa sighed, his jolly expression dimming slightly. "Yes, my sack of presents is empty. It was full when I left the North Pole, but now they're gone. Without those presents, I won't be able to deliver gifts to all the children and animals tonight." The wolf shifted awkwardly. "Perhaps I could help you find them?" he offered. Santa's eyes twinkled. "You want to help?" "I know I haven't been very good in the past," the wolf admitted, "but maybe I'd like to try." Santa's warm smile returned. "Well, wolf, I'd be glad to have your help. Christmas is about kindness and giving after all. The wolf nodded, a warm and fuzzy feeling creeping into his chest. I think I know who might have taken your presents. Using his sharp nose, the wolf sniffed the air. There was a familiar scent of mischief in the wind, one he had smelled before. Follow me, he said, leading Santa through the snow-covered forest. The two of them walked past tall pine trees and frozen streams until they reached a dark, twisted part of the woods. The wolf pointed to a large hollow log. Trolls. They're always playing pranks. I bet they swiped your presents. Santa nodded thoughtfully. Ah, I've heard of them. Let's find out. Quietly, Santa and the wolf approached the log. Peering inside, they saw a group of tiny, mischievous trolls huddled around a pile of presents. They were giggling as they played with the ribbons and bows. Santa stepped forward. Ahem. The trolls jumped, startled to see him, and indeed the big bad wolf. They looked at the presents, then back at Santa. One of them let out a tiny whimper. What are you doing with my gifts? Santa asked, kindly but firmly. The trolls looked at each other sheepishly. Santa sighed gently. I understand you wanted to join in the fun, but taking things that don't belong to you isn't the way to do it. Christmas is about giving and sharing, not just receiving. The trolls looked down, squeaking ashamedly. Their leader scuffed his foot on the ground. The big bad wolf, who had been quietly watching, suddenly spoke up. Why don't we make a deal? He suggested. You trolls can help bring the presents back to the sleigh. That way you'll be part of the Christmas magic, and it might make up for taking the gifts. The trolls perked up at the idea and chirped hopefully. Great idea, Wolfie, Santa said with a wink. And so, as Santa, the wolf and the trolls loaded the presents back into Santa's sleigh, the wolf felt the warm spark in his heart spread to the tips of his fingers and right down to his toes. Maybe Christmas wasn't that bad after all. And maybe, just maybe, neither was he. Once the sleigh was loaded, Santa turned to the wolf. Wolfie, how would you like to join me for the rest of the deliveries? The wolf's eyes widened. You mean, ride with you in the sleigh? Santa chuckled. Of course. After all, you've shown me that you understand the true spirit of Christmas. Who better to help? With excitement, the wolf climbed into the sleigh beside Santa. The trolls jumped about and waved them off as Santa took the reins. With a jingle of bells, the sleigh roared into the sky, leaving the forest far below. Throughout the night, Santa and the wolf worked side by side, delivering gifts to all the good children and animals. By the time dawn arrived, they had delivered every single present. Santa guided the sleigh back to the clearing where they had first met. He smiled as he climbed down. Thank you, Wolfie, Santa said warmly. I knew you wouldn't let me down. The wolf was confused for a moment. You knew? What do you mean, you knew? Santa looked a little sheepish and said, Well, maybe it wasn't such a coincidence that I crashed in this particular part of the forest. It seemed to me that this Christmas, more than anything, you needed a friend. The wolf looked at him in amazement. Thank you, he said. Santa shook him warmly by the paw. I'd better get back to the North Pole, he said. The wolf turned to head back to his den. One more thing, Santa said. He reached into his sack and handed the wolf a small package. This is for you, Santa said, with a twinkle in his eye. You're officially off the naughty list. The wolf carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside was a soft, cosy scarf and a shiny bell that jingled softly when he shook it. Merry Christmas, Santa, the wolf whispered, a tear in his eye. With a final jingle of bells, Santa's sleigh disappeared into the morning sky, leaving the wolf standing in the snow, filled with the joy of Christmas. The Big Bad Wolf's Christmas Surprise. Once upon a time, there was a tiny village surrounded by a thick, enchanted forest. And in that forest lived the Big Bad Wolf. Everyone in the village and the forest knew the stories about him. How he blew down houses, chased children, and caused general mischief wherever he went. But lately, the Big Bad Wolf had been keeping to himself. he no longer terrorised the village, nor did he stalk the forest paths. He had become lonely, forgotten, and bitter. It was Christmas Eve, and the entire village was buzzing with excitement. The villagers were placing shiny baubles on their trees, hanging twinkling lights, and preparing grand feasts to share with their friends and families. Laughter and cheer echoed through the streets. But high on a hill, in a dark and cold den, the big bad wolf sat alone, far away from the warmth and joy of the village. The wolf watched from his den as the twinkling lights of the village flickered in the distance. He grumbled to himself, "Christmas, bah! What's so special about it? A bunch of silly decorations and pointless gift-giving." He huffed and turned back to the dark corner of his den. His grumpy mood was made worse by a bothersome and irritating feeling of, well, he wasn't sure what. Lately, he'd noticed that the spirit of Christmas, the joy, the cheer, the magic, seemed to be fading. The forest was quieter, the laughter not as bright, and even the snow seemed less sparkling. Not that he cared, but he wondered what had caused it all. As the night grew darker and the villagers started to head to their beds, the big bad wolf was startled by a loud thud outside his den. He pricked his ears and cautiously moved towards the entrance. To his surprise, lying in the snow outside his den was a large, shimmering sack. It sparkled with a soft glow and seemed to warm the air around it. "What now?" he muttered, his nose twitching as he inspected the sack. The wolf gingerly opened the top, peering inside. To his shock, the sack was filled with swirling and glittering magic, and as he stared at it, he felt overcome with joy and awe at the magic of Christmas. The wolf snapped the sack closed again, looking at the tag on it. "To the village, your Christmas spirit, love from Santa Claus." The wolf's eyes widened. "Santa Claus?" he gasped. "This is his sack of Christmas spirit. How did it end up here?" The wolf thought hard about what to do with the sack. What if he just kept it? Finally, he shook his head. "I can't keep this," he muttered. "Christmas may not be for me, but it's important to everyone else." Determined to do the right thing, the wolf knew he had to return the sack to the village before Christmas morning. But how? He couldn't just walk into the village without causing a panic. No one trusted him, and they surely wouldn't believe he was bringing Christmas spirit back instead of taking it away. As he thought about what to do, the wolf's sharp ears picked up the sound of footsteps crunching through the snow. He looked up to see a young boy from the village wandering towards his den. The boy was shivering, his red coat flapping in the cold wind, and he looked lost. "Hey!" the wolf called out before he could stop himself. "What are you doing out here, kid?" The boy froze, wide-eyed and terrified. The big bad wolf?" he stammered. I didn't mean to." The wolf sighed, trying not to scare the boy any further. "Relax, kid, I'm not going to hurt you. What are you doing so far from the village on Christmas Eve?" I got lost," the boy admitted, his teeth chattering from the cold. "I went into the forest to find a perfect Christmas tree for my family, but then it got dark, and now I can't find my way home." The wolf tilted his head. "Well, you're lucky you didn't get caught by something worse than me. The forest can be dangerous at night." The boy moved quickly to stand closer to the wolf, no longer afraid of him. He looked up at the wolf's large, looming figure and smiled nervously, and then glanced at the shimmering sack behind him. "What's that?" The wolf hesitated, but then decided to tell the truth. "This is Santa's bag of Christmas spirit. It fell near my den, and now I need to return it to the village before Christmas morning, or no one will have a happy Christmas." The boy's eyes lit up. "Santa's bag? Why, this is incredible! But how will you get into the village?" "I was hoping you might help me," with a wry smile. "I can get you back through the forest, and if you can guide me through the village without causing a fuss, we can get the Christmas spirit back where it belongs." The boy thought for a moment, then held out his hand. The wolf looked at it cautiously, and then reached out his paw, and they shook on it. The wolf picked up the magical sack and tossed it over his shoulder. Together, the boy and the wolf carefully made their way through the forest and toward the village. As they approached the edge of the village, the boy turned to the wolf. "We'll go through the back streets and into the square where the big tree is," the boy whispered. "That's where Santa always leaves the Christmas spirit for everyone to share." The wolf nodded, following the boy's lead as they crept through the snowy streets, dodging windows and avoiding the villagers. Soon they reached the village square, where a giant Christmas tree stood proudly in the middle. It sparkled with lights, but something about it seemed dimmer than usual. Without the Christmas spirit, the tree couldn't shine the way it was meant to. The wolf gently placed the sack beneath the tree, and as soon as he did, the tree glowed brighter and the air around them filled with the sweet scent of pine and cinnamon, and the entire village seemed to hum with warmth and joy. The Christmas spirit had returned. The boy looked at the wolf in awe. "You did it! You brought Christmas back!" The wolf smiled, a real genuine smile, and felt something warm in his chest. "I suppose I did," he said quietly. Just then, a soft jingle filled the air, and a familiar voice boomed from above.
"Ho, ho, ho! What do we have here?"
The wolf and the boy looked up to see Santa Claus landing his sleigh in the square. Santa hopped out and walked over to them with a twinkle in his eye. "Ah, my sack! I wondered where it had gone," Santa said, patting the wolf on the back. "Thank you, Wolf. You've saved Christmas for everyone." The wolf blushed, not used to praise. It was the right thing to do. Santa smiled warmly. "Indeed it was. You've shown that even the big bad wolf can have a heart full of Christmas spirit." The boy grinned and tugged at the wolf's paw. "See? You're not so bad after all." With a jolly laugh, Santa handed the wolf a small wrapped gift. "For you, my friend. Merry Christmas." The wolf unwrapped the gift to find a beautifully crafted ornament, a shining star to place on the village Christmas tree. For the first time in his life, the big bad wolf felt a sense of belonging, and not only that, but the true joy of Christmas. This is the tale of Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, quite close to here actually, there was a wild and wonderful forest. The forest was full of friendly folk, but there were also some scary parts of the forest, with ferocious and sneaky beasts. One of these creatures was a wolf. He was big and he was bad, and he was always trying to gobble up the friendly folk. The friendly folk knew this, and they told stories to their children about the big bad wolf, about how he would try to trick them, how he was clever and ruthless, and he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Over the years, the friendly folk became wise to the wolf's sneaky tricks, and they weren't so easy for the wolf to trick anymore. And so the wolf went away to try to find a village full of people who weren't so clever. This made the friendly folk very happy, as the danger that prowled just beyond the tree line was no longer there. Slowly, the grown-ups started to let the children play deeper into the woods, or skip along the banks of the stream, or walk to the older cottages in the centre of the forest to deliver bread or letters. Anyway, back to Little Red Riding Hood. Remember her? One day, she was called into the kitchen by her mother. "Your grandmother isn't feeling well," she said. "I've baked a pie for her. Will you take it to Granny's cottage to cheer her up?" Red loved her granny, and she was so excited to go and see her that she did a little dance before rushing out of the door so fast she almost forgot the basket. Her mother gave her a big hug and said, "Watch out for the big bad wolf," and they both laughed, as this wasn't really a warning anymore, not like it used to be. It was just something people said. As Little Red Riding Hood skipped along the path, she admired the blossoms and whistled back to the songbirds singing in the trees. She loved the forest in spring. The smell of the wild garlic, the tap-tap-tapping of the woodpeckers. She felt the woods come alive around her, and she felt more at home than she did by the fire in her own little cottage. Quite suddenly, Red noticed that the birds had stopped singing. The air had a chill in it, and the blossoms even seemed to curl in on themselves, away from whatever threat was in the air. Red stopped and looked around, holding on more tightly to her basket. Suddenly, a deep voice spoke. "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood." Startled, she turned around and saw him. He was huge and grey, and he was standing up on his hind legs, so he was much taller than a man. He had sharp teeth and a cunning smile. "Good morning," she replied politely, though she could feel her heart hammering against her chest. "And where are you going on this fine day?" asked the wolf, leaning forward and showing her his toothy grin. "I'm going to Granny's cottage," Little Red Riding Hood said. "My grandmother isn't feeling well, and I'm bringing her a pie." The wolf's eyes gleamed and his mouth watered. "How kind of you," he said. "Do you know, there's a lovely patch of bluebells just over that ridge. I'm sure it would cheer her to have a bunch by her bed." What a kindly wolf, Red thought. Perhaps those silly children's tales are just a load of old rubbish. Red smiled and waved at the wolf as she set off to find the bluebells. The wolf chuckled to himself as he slunk on down the path towards Granny's cottage. Before long, Red was at the door of Granny's cottage with the basket in one hand and a generous bouquet of bluebells in the other. She tapped gently at the door and a strangely quiet voice said, "Come in, dear." Red let herself in and looked around. It was dark and dingy, and there was a peculiar chill inside the cottage. She could see her grandmother in bed in the corner. She had the covers pulled right up to her chin, and there was something strange about her face. "Come closer, dear. Come and sit by me," she called. Red thought to herself, "Oh dear, Grandmother must be worse than I thought. She never has all of the curtains closed, and she always has a fire crackling away in the hearth." Little Red Riding Hood had always been a practical sort of girl, so she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. "Don't worry about me, Granny," she called into the dark. "I'll get this place shipshape in no time." Red poured some water into a jug for the bluebells and set to sweeping the floor and starting the fire. She started to open the curtains when she heard a funny, muffled sort of sound coming from a broom cupboard. Red stopped and looked around, but Granny started coughing and said, "Come closer, dear. I'd like to look at you. It's been so long since you visited." Well, that was definitely strange. Red and the other children came to Granny's cottage to bake cookies and hear Granny's stories twice a week. Had the old woman bumped her head? Red brought the jug of bluebells over to the bed, thinking they would brighten her Granny's mood. As she got closer, she couldn't believe what strange effects this illness had had on the woman in the bed. "Oh, Grandmother," Red said, "what big ears you have." "All the better to hear you with, my dear," the figure in the bed replied. "And Grandmother, what big eyes you have," said Red. "All the better to see you with, my dear," the strange creature said. "And Grandmother, what big teeth you have," cried Red. "All the better to eat you with," roared the wolf, throwing off the covers and going to leap from the bed. Little Red Riding Hood was so shocked she didn't have a second to make a plan. She just used what she had in her hands. Quick as a flash, she lifted the bluebell jug in the air and smashed it down on the wolf's head, sending a spray of water, sharp shards of pottery, and 100 bluebells showering all over the place. The wolf was out cold on the floor. Just then, Red's real Granny came bursting from the broom cupboard in her nightie. Red and Granny hugged and then got to work tidying up the mess. They tied up the wolf and carried him down to the river, where they put him in Granny's old rowing boat and floated him away. The wolf was never seen again. Later, while Red and Granny finished the pie, they decided that seeing as the wolf problem was solved, there was no good reason to worry the other grown-ups in the forest. After all, they would never allow the children to play amongst the trees, skip along the stream, or walk to cottages deep in the forest anymore if they found out. It would stay their secret. And so, the children kept coming to Granny's cottage to hear her stories. Even when Red grew old and moved into the cottage herself, the children still come and I always kept the secret. Well, until now, of course. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a young boy who spent all of his days sitting high up on a hill under a maple tree. He had just one job: to watch over the sheep from the big, bad wolf. The wolf, too, had just one job: to hunt down sheep to satisfy his hunger. The boy often found himself bored. Guarding the sheep day in, day out left him wishing for a different job, or perhaps some excitement. More than anything, he hated sitting alone all day, every day. So, one day, he decided to shout, "Help! Help! A wolf is chasing the sheep, and they're all running away!" The villagers heard the boy's cries, and they all dropped what they were doing and quickly rushed to help. But when they reached the top of the hill, there was no wolf, just the boy and the sheep, peacefully resting in the greenest grass you could imagine. "Where is the wolf?" the villagers asked. "There is no wolf," the boy said, unable to stop himself from laughing. The villagers were upset. They were exhausted from running and frustrated about their interrupted work. One of the men turned around and shouted at the boy, "Don't cry wolf when there is no wolf around. Only call for help when you truly need it." The boy found all of this very amusing. He was quite the little prankster and enjoyed seeing people rush up the hill for no reason. So, the next day, the boy walked up the hill with his flock. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled again. "Help! Wolf! Help me! He's going to eat all the sheep in my flock!" Once more, the villagers dropped what they were doing and ran up the hill. And once again, there was no wolf. "Where is the wolf?" the villagers asked. "There is no wolf," the boy replied, and once again he couldn't help but laugh. Again, a man turned and firmly said, "Don't cry wolf when there isn't one around. Only call for help when you truly need it." The next morning, the boy went up the hill with his flock again. And wouldn't you know it, this time, he actually saw a real wolf hiding in the nearby forest. At first, the boy didn't know what to do, but then he started yelling, "Help! Wolf! Help!" The people in the village heard his cries, but this time they knew better and didn't come running up the hill. The villagers kept hearing his cries, but didn't move an inch. They wouldn't fall for the same trick again. Now all the sheep ran away and were lost, chased off by the wolf. The boy was very saddened by this and sat down by the tree again. But this time, there was no smile on his face. At the end of the day, the villagers waited as usual for the boy to bring back the flock of sheep. But that evening, the boy didn't return. They decided to go and see what was wrong. The villagers gathered around the boy. Through his tears, he asked, "Why didn't you come to help me? A big bad wolf chased all the sheep away. I yelled and yelled, but no one came to help." The villagers were angry because their sheep were lost. The man who had always advised the boy to stop yelling as a joke said, "Now you see, no one believes a liar. How are we supposed to know if it was real or if you just did it for your amusement again?" From that day on, the boy always told the truth. Or at least he tried to. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this magical story. If you want to come along on more of our adventures, make sure you subscribe to our channel. There's so much more to be discovered. You can start right now by clicking on our channel and picking your next favourite tale. There really is something for everyone, from daring heroes and mischievous creatures to magical lands and secret wonders. And remember, by subscribing, you'll be the first to know when a brand new story is ready to be enjoyed. Let's go.